Hello and welcome. In this episode, we are going to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on along the front lines. We are going to talk about the missile that hit a Polish town and killed 2 people. There's more than about mobilization and political scheming from Russia, especially inside of Russia. The attack on the 15th of November, which happened right after I finished my last situation report, was done with probably over 90 KH-101 and KH-555 cruise missiles. Ukraine is also saying that over 10 drones have been used, which should probably be Shahed 136 or something like this. Ukraine is now saying that all drones and 73 of the cruise missiles have been shot down, and we have an example here of that happening. You can watch it again. You see it coming in. And here the air defense missile hits it and makes it crash. This means shooting down 73 out of 90 or a little more than 90 is a fairly high success rate, which has been increasing in the last few weeks and months. All of this shows how much more effective Ukrainian air defense has become in the defense of Ukraine's airspace, especially against cruise missiles. NASAMS, the air defense system delivered by the US, has also been used, and the Americans say it has been used with a 100% success rate, as well as it has been reported prior to that about the German IRIS-T system. An attack of this scale needs significant preparation time, as the attacks have been coming from several different directions and were coordinated to overwhelm the Ukrainian air defense. All of this shows that the attack itself cannot have been a reaction to Zelensky's speech at the G20 summit, more or less that but it's more an indication that it was pre-planned, either as some sort of revenge for the loss of Kherson, or that Russia expected Zelensky to say something that would give them reason to respond directly with a massive missile attack in this regard. Russia will not be able to continue those attacks endlessly. The usage of cruise missiles is massive, and with Russia's declining stockpiles and troubles in keeping up with the production, those attacks are still possible to be repeated, but not over months and years to come. It's probably down to maybe half a dozen to a dozen such attacks. Then it should more or less be done, at least for now. There was a hit in Poland somewhere around here, if I remember. It's somewhere northwest of Lviv, inside of Poland, a few kilometers inside of the Polish territory. 2 civilians have been killed in this, and initially the blame was shifted towards Russia, but by now it seems more or less clear that it was an S-300 air defense missile, a SAM, that crashed within Poland and killed civilians there. The Polish Prime Minister is blaming Russia for that regardless, because he's saying without Russia's attack, obviously this wouldn't have happened, as this is a defensive measure by Ukraine that missed its mark and thus crashed to the ground with its warhead exploding and killing civilians. So Poland is not blaming Ukraine for that directly, and this should be more or less it in this regard, at least. When we come about the Eastern Front, the Russians are still saying that the Ukrainian offensive is continuing along the line more or less Crimean-Svatove, but obviously somewhat north in the direction of Kupiansk as well. The Russian military blogger is saying northwest of Svatove, there's a massive troop concentration happening, and especially in that region here, in preparation to a general offensive by the Ukrainians. This cannot be confirmed by me at this very point. The Russians are reporting the Ukrainians have reached the western suburbs, or the western border of Kuzemivka, which is, where was it? Kuzemivka, which is here. So they have reached this and they have entrenched themselves there. So they have entered the town. The saying was that they tried to cut the railroad and the road line which is going here, which would then be an indication that the Russians are calling all of this Kuzemivka, even though that seemed to be two different towns. And so in fact the Ukrainians are likely in Novoselivske, not in Kuzemivka itself, but according to the Russians they are now entrenched in this area here, very close to the railroad line, which is this here, which you can hopefully see here. I don't know, is the, yeah. It's close to that line here. In this region, there should be the where the where the Ukrainians have entrenched themselves by now. South of it, there are recon attacks being reported by the Ukrainians, so still Ukrainian offensives. There are also Ukrainian attacks reported in the direction of Novomykilske, which is where was it? Here. So along this line, this is the direction the Ukrainians supposedly attacked. They also, according to Russian military bloggers, Ukrainians are now concentrating troops here in Makivka, which would be an indication of further Ukrainian attacks east of it. We have further reports of Ukrainian attacks in the direction of Chervonopopivka. So again here in two directions, the Ukrainians are obviously trying to cut the road between Svatova and Crimean to isolate both from each other. Further south, we have reports about continued fighting about Bilohorivka. The Russians seem to be in the offensive here, but we have, according to a Russian telegram groups, the Ukrainians are attacking, and I quote here more or less, from Popasna to Kharkiv Oblast. Now, Popasna is here, so it's far behind the front line, which makes it a little difficult to say what that person means, or if there's another Popasna I can't find. But what we can more or less confirm is that the Ukrainians are attacking more or less north of Bilohorivka down up to the Kharkiv Oblast, which is starting here along the front line. Further south, we have Russian attacks, usual attacks around Bakhmut. Bakhmutske, Soledar are mentioned, which are here. We have attacks reported at Mayorska, which is down here. Reports about heavy Russian losses in this region by the Ukrainians, but I can't confirm it in this way. Further south, we have reports of attacks around Avdiivka. The town of Opytne is either captured or at the very least the Russians have fully entrenched themselves now. So we have confirmed advances in this direction, in the direction of Avdiivka here. We have also reports about attacks on Vodiane and Nevelske, which are here and here. The Ukrainians themselves are saying they defeated attacks at Pervomaiske, which is here. So in this direction they defeated attacks. They defeated attacks in the direction of Krasnohorivka, which is here, and in the direction of Novomykhailivka, which is down here. All of this, so more or less the whole front line is on fire. The Russians keep attacking, stay in the offensive. The Russian military Ministry of Defense is now saying Pavlivka is captured, and they claim, which is here, they claim that they killed up to 1,400 Ukrainian soldiers in the process, which seems massively exaggerated. It looks like an extreme exaggeration and could be understood as some reaction to the previous claims that Russian units in this area have suffered horrendous losses, were basically deleted because they were pushed into the fire again and again. And obviously, if the Russians claim that they killed so much more Ukrainians, then they could kind of justify those losses should they become well known. Because as of now, my last understanding is that the Russians are still claiming that the losses of the naval brigade that has been used here are fairly light, unlike the Russian side, Russian military bloggers have reported before, that it was more or less destroyed. Further west, we have a report, several reports actually, about Russian attacks in the direction of Remivka, which is here. So now we have offensive activity by the Russians here along that road north. On several days, the attacks are starting here, so this part of the front is now heating up as well. The so-called Donetsk People's Republic commander Alexander Khodorkovsky said that generally it was planned in the past to attack Vuhledar from two directions. Obviously, I can't fully confirm which directions the attacks were coming, but we had reports about the attacks in the direction of Novomikhailivka, so it would kind of make it logical that they try to maybe go down like this. But he said while the plan was like this, the quality of the Russian troops, meaning their training and their equipment, was so horrible, and the communication possibilities among the units did not allow an attack like this, which means that because it was impossible, the Russians were incapable of doing a sophisticated tactical maneuver. They more or less switched to frontal attacks, leading to those heavy losses we have heard reports over for the last roughly 2 weeks. The Russian side is now talking about a Ukrainian attack. If we go to the southern front, the Russians are now talking about a Ukrainian attack in the direction of Vasilivka. They say it hasn't reached anything, but we see first Ukrainian offensive activity along here. And when we go further west, the Ukrainian General Staff is now saying that the main defensive line of the Russian is being withdrawn from the Dnipro by 15 to 20 kilometers. This has to be explained in a certain way. First of all, it seems extremely unlikely that this means there are no troops along the shore anymore, but we are probably talking where the main defensive line are, so where the majority of their firepower rests, where they will focus on the attack. So why do they go back from the riverbanks? Well, generally, there are two more or less theories how you can, or two tactics, how you can defeat a naval invasion, which this would more or less be. You can try to stop it in the water, or you can try to destroy it once it has landed. Both of them are fairly viable depending on your opponent and your own capabilities, but with the Ukrainian precision artillery, it seems extremely dangerous for the Russians to try to actually hold positions along the other side of the river vis-a-vis Ukrainians, which can then hit them the whole time and destroy them and prepare a naval invasion. So it looks like the Russians plan to, in case of a Ukrainian attack, let them land. Obviously against opposition, they won't allow them to freely land, but then push in and try to destroy them, as the resupply situation of any potential landing on the left bank of the Dnipro will be extremely stressed, if not horrible. So this seems an indication that this should not be understood as an indication that the Russians are handing over the left bank of the river. It's more that they apply a tactic that works with their means and the Ukrainian means, and my interpretation of that would be that the Russians expect the Ukrainian artillery to be too powerful to stand vis-a-vis and getting their positions destroyed, so they will just position a light blocking force along the river, and while the rest of the troops is further back and ready to push into a potential Ukrainian advance. But we see, and that is fairly interesting too, we had reports in the past, I mentioned them here in the situation reports, about Russian defensive operations far behind the front lines, that they shouldn't be misinterpreted. But now we have a report of Russian forces also entrenching themselves here in Bechteri. Here we had reports about Ivanivka in the past. All of this would at least give the indication that the Russians might think it's at least a theoretical possibility that a naval invasion by the Ukrainians might happen, either here on the Kinburn Spit or along the Yahorik Bay, maybe inside of the bay, so to defend in the western direction here. Other than that, it doesn't make too much sense, because if defensive possession here behind, not at the shore, but behind it. Further west would not make sense if if it's meant to defend against an attack over the river here, because any attack over the river would march south towards Crimea, and Russian troops here in Bechteri would likely be cut off and thus afterwards being destroyed if they're here this far away from their only way of retreat, which would be over the river here. So to defend this doesn't seem to make too much sense, except you prepare for a front line that's going down more or less this line, because the Ukrainians are west of it, at least as a possibility. So this shows us they at least take the possibility serious that the Ukrainians might do an amphibious landing after all, either here on the Kinburn Spit or more or less in the bay here of Yarholik. In the Crimea, we have some news that it's about the Crimean Bridge. Now, Ribar is reporting that the bridge, the repair of the bridge will take until summer or autumn of 2023 because of the bad weather in winter. It's too dangerous to do work like this and 30 meters above the water inside of the cold winter storms, being threatened with the cold winter storms. So the bridge will be difficult to use for quite some time, and the reports is here along one railway line that the one of the two lines going over the bridge is still not operational again, which gives us an indication of how difficult the Russian supply situation more or less along that whole area here in the south is, as the Russian supply focuses on railway traffic, and the only road traffic then that is allowed to cross the bridge right now is cars, whereas no buses, no trucks, etc. are allowed to cross, and the railway is at most at halfway capacity here. From partisans, we have news from Melitopol. It's one representative of the Melitopol Occupation Authority, Dmitry Trukhin, has been attacked with an IED and he's currently in the ICU. So he has survived but is heavily injured. When we talk about mobilization, we have starts now about petitions inside of Russia that are demanding a demobilization. We also have petitions of mothers with disabled children or with more than 3 children asking for their husbands to be exempted from the mobilization so they can help take care of the kids. And a Russian naval officer, he's been called as Colonel Kadim Buko, even though I highly doubt that the Russian naval forces have a colonel. So it's probably the equivalent of a colonel in the naval forces. He had participated in a campaign against the mobilization and he has now committed suicide. The Russian authorities have said so, that he was found in his office after having committed suicide, and he committed suicide by shooting into his own chest 5 times. There are different reports out of different regions of Russia that the Russian military authorities are still handing out draft notices or call-up notices for the mobilization. There are some reports that they frame it like they were missed before or for whatever reason. So it's not, they claim that it's not a new wave or not an ongoing wave, but we have pretty much confirmed reports that people are still being called up in Russia. Obviously, I cannot say to which degree this is right now, and it must be in comparison a fairly low ratio. We also have reports about continuous forced recruitment inside of occupied Ukraine. That was to be expected. In the past, we talked about it fairly often, and the reports are coming in. And Russian opposition media are saying at least 38 mobilized soldiers have already died before even entering Ukraine out of various different reasons. We had it in the past: murder, brawl, accidents, drug abuse, etc. At least 38 of those have died before even reaching Ukraine. And the independent Russian media Astra is saying 300 Russian mobilized soldiers are being held captive in Zaitsev because they refuse to, which is in Donetsk, if I remember correctly, because they refuse to go to the front line. And Astra is talking that at least 7 of those prison camps have been identified within the occupied regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. And when we come to the political part, we now have reports from Russian Telegram channels. You see here the original link that is, and we can see that they claim 150,000 children were evacuated, as they call it, from Donbas alone in 2022. And in the videos, they more or less join Ukrainian children that are now with Russian families and are adopted. There's even a report about one family that has adopted 9 siblings, 9 Ukrainian siblings that are now being being more or less raised by Russian parents, which would then be obviously lead to the assimilation into the Russian culture. We see here images out of that documentary. It's all in Russian, so there's not much of a point of me of doing more than scrolling through. You will find the links to those pages on the website in a few hours probably, so you can check it out yourself if you're looking for it. When we talk about Ukrainian kids being given to Russian parents, this obviously leads to their assimilation and can thus be used to accuse the Russians once more that they attempt to eliminate Ukrainian identity, which would be considered, according to international conventions, as a war crime, especially as a genocide, as this would be an attempt to eradicate Ukrainian identity. Kadyrov, the leader of the Chechen satrapy, he's saying that he's currently talking to the Russian Federal Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. You heard her name being mentioned here a couple of times already, and his idea is to bring difficult teenagers out of all of Russia, and according to them, we are talking about this here also being Russia, obviously, bringing them into Chechnya so they can be used for can be assimilated, and they can be brought under control with preventative work and with education in the direction of military and patriotic with military and patriotic education. There should be made the attempt to educate them in a military patriotic way by the Chechens. The Russian opposition media Medusa is saying 2 sources of it, which are close to the Kremlin, are saying Prigozhin is now attempting to create a conservative movement, which could turn into a party. This would now be the first obvious claim that Prigozhin is trying to enter politics, after him having indicated it at least with his deeds, not with his words before. And as I said, we will probably likely continue to hear about Prigozhin for the coming time until he also commits suicide. The Ukrainian Defense Resistance Center is saying the majority of all administration workers in the occupied region of Donetsk is now coming from Russia. Almost all collaborators have been replaced, which is an indication of how much Russia is valuing them, their work, and their treason to the Ukrainian government. Finally, we come to the support. Belarusian opposition is saying in October alone, 98 T-72, 40 BMP-2, 20 additional BMPs in parts, and 53 Ural trucks have been brought to have been given to Russia. This shows what I said for weeks, if not months. A Belarusian attack is not going to happen. You don't give Russia your material if you intend to enter the war by yourself. I don't see any way of Belarus to enter the war actively apart from handing over, giving its or providing its territory to the Russian armed forces. We have reports about the US that South Korea and US are currently negotiating about the sale of ammunition. the saying is that it's about 100,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery grenades. South Korea is confirming that, but they are saying they stick to their decision that no deadly weapons are being handed over to Ukraine. But the negotiation is being done because the US have a dangerous shortage in their ammo stocks, and South Korea will help the Americans to fill it up. But a part of that agreement will be that the US have to be the final user of those grenades. The obvious result is by buying 100,000 artillery rounds from South Korea, US has the potential to deliver with maintaining their current stockpile another 100,000 rounds of their own production towards Ukraine, and that's obviously how it is meant. While allowing the US to deliver more, the South Koreans maintain their stance that they are not delivering weapons to Ukraine, which they have no interest in, as obviously Russia could strengthen North Korea or could deliver North Korea weapons, could hand them over to weapon technology that could threaten the South Korean state in the future. So Ukraine, South Korean's government maintains some ambivalence, some distance towards actively helping the Ukrainian war effort for their own reasons, as they are threatened by North Korea, which could, as revenge, then receive something from Russia. And the final news is something from Germany again. There are reports in the German media now that until the middle of October, German citizens donated 862 million euros to help Ukrainian victims of that war throughout the summer, more or less, throughout the duration of the war. That's it for now. Until now, rather short today, but while there's a lot of fighting on the front line, there's not that much movement, and we are already finished by this. So if you enjoyed this and if you want to support the channel, which is only possible, this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you, then you can support it by the means stated in the description. Thank you very much for your support, but you can also help the channel grow by hitting the subscribe button. Don't forget the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. Recommend the channel to friends and acquaintances, and obviously hit the thumbs up if you like the video and leave a comment to help with the algorithm. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.